I think we just inadvertently solved the arms race and we weren't even trying. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan, and today we are going to be talking about the challenge of winning in Commander. And who better to help us talk about this than our good friend Cameron from the Labmaniacs. How you doing today, Cameron?
I'm doing really well. It's kind of hot out here in Seattle, but keeping with it and enjoying life as a content creator.
That's awesome. Cameron, tell us a little bit about yourself and the Labmaniacs.
Labmaniacs, we were pretty much the first CEDH YouTube channel out there, mainly making gameplay videos and deck techs. Life happened and I had to take a little bit of a break, but I'm back at it. Doing gameplay videos still. They're a little slower, but I'm also creating deck rundowns that give you a 5 to 10 minute look at every deck in the CEDH format and give you a reason why you might want to play that deck or what you really need to know when you're trying to play against it. 8 decks in, we probably have about 150 more to go, but they're coming out.
That's a lot. That's a tall order. I mean, you're doing really good work, that's for sure. Just so everyone knows, for those of you who are unaware, the Labmaniacs are kind of the grandfathers of the CDH content creation scene. Playing with Power was watching the Labmaniacs before Playing with Power was even a concept. So they're super awesome, and we are huge fanboys. Just saying it. Just going to say it. That's what it is. So, all right, cool.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys are great. You're part of the reason we got started, quite frankly. So if you like Playing with Power, you can thank the Labmaniacs for that. So before we get into that, let's go ahead and quickly do a quick shout out to all of our sponsors. That is TCG Player, that is Dragon Shield, and that is from support from viewers/listeners like you over at Patreon. Whenever you're picking up cards from some of the new sets that are coming out, of which there are some really cool ones, Modern Horizons 2, I'm looking at you, make sure you pick them up from TCG Player. You get them at really great prices, and you get to support local game stores as well. Whenever you get those products, you make sure you put them into Dragon Shield accessories. Playing with Power stands behind Dragon Shield all the way. We love Dragon Shield before they were even supporting us. We think they're just fantastic. They're one of our favorite when it comes to accessories. And then finally, all the support of viewers like you over on Patreon. This support from Patreon helps us bring this content to the world, and you get all kinds of really awesome perks in return. Discord access to our live stream when we record games, additional content, behind the scenes footage, archive footage of old gameplays, raw gameplay. So tiers at all different budgets. If you want to consider supporting us, there's links in the description below, and we really, really appreciate it. And we also shout out one lucky patron in each of these episodes. And today's lucky patron is Victor Chan. Thank you very much, Victor. We really appreciate all your support and all of the supporters over on Patreon. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into today's topic, which is the challenge of winning in Commander. So what we're actually asking about with this topic today is how winning in Commander is something we aren't necessarily something we should covet, and how tournaments are, can be considered as almost bad for Commander players in some aspects. And when you might hear that sentence, you might say, well, what exactly does that mean? What exactly are you talking about? CEDH is definitely something that could be a tournament format. Well, there's actually a lot of logistical hurdles and a lot of misconceptions when it comes to a 4-player format or a free-for-all format versus just a standard 1v1 format like we see in all the other Magic formats. And that's what we brought on Cameron today to really dive in and talk about today. So let's go ahead and do that. So Cameron, let's just start off. So let's talk about some of the basic structure of winning in Commander versus winning in something like a 1v1 format or even like a two-headed giant format.
Yeah, so winning in a regular game of Commander, it provides a lot of mental barriers that you're not necessarily aware of that you're going to be running into while you play. Let's take a step back and look at just regular Magic. You're playing 1v1. In the grand scope of things, you should have a 50% win rate. The better players are going to be in the 60s to 70%. And you can really see your progress at like an F&M. You have a Swiss round, and you can say, hey, I am 2-1. Hey, I did good for the night. I did better than 50-50. And you can see yourself progress very, very linearly along your tournament results. And the same can be said for Two-Headed Giant. You have you and a partner against another pair of 2 players. And you think about that is multiplayer, but in fact, you're acting like you are 2 players. It's a 4-player game, but in the way the game goes, and in the winning sense, you're still 2 players. So that's just, in a sense, a 1v1 game, a team versus a team. Now, Commander, typically you're playing 4 players. That's kind of the magic number. You can't play more, you can play less. But 4 is the magic number that most people try to play at, and you're playing free-for-all. So instead of playing at a 50% expected win rate, you're actually at a 25%. You're actually at a 25% expected win rate. And that can really mess with what your perceived skill level is and what your results show. You can't really see a linear line of progression with a 25% win rate in any sort of tournament setting. If you are tracking your records, it will show lots and lots of losses. It's just because that's how it works. And I've done the numbers on it, and it gets really crazy. With a 25% win streak over like 100 games, you pretty much can expect to see like 12 to 15 losses in a row at some point. And that you're almost guaranteed to see that many losses in a row. And as somebody who started playing Magic in 1v1, that is really hard to take. Like, just mentally, you say, I am better than this. I play better than this. And you are a great player, but you have the issue of going up in a format where you just don't expect to win much. And it's a really big change from tournament Magic, where you can say, hey, I am putting in a entry fee, and I think that I'm a good enough player that I could possibly get at least that entry fee back. But with a 25% win rate, in general, you're pretty much never going to see that entry fee back. At least the way most, if you took a normal 1v1 tournament price structure, you're pretty much never going to see that entry fee back. And it's really hard to take that on at the start, unless you start looking at the numbers.
Hearing that information, it's definitely not the normal way that people try to quantify things. And I think it's because not too many people have taken the effort to quantify such a thing. 1v1 formats, they're super easy to quantify. I went 4-0. Okay, I went 2-2. I went 0-3 and dropped. It's really easy to quantify your progression, like you said. And in a Commander game, saying something like you're going to win, you're going to lose 12 games in a row, and that's still on your normal, decent winning streak or whatever, or that's an average turnout. Yeah,
expected. That's
actually a very, at surface level, kind of a disheartening metric, and that's such a I'm very taken aback by a metric like that. And it's really interesting when quantifying that, realizing that is actually pretty decent. So what would you say are some of the implications around something like this, or knowing this type of data? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Looking through forums, since pretty much I started playing Magic, there has always been the topic of power creep, about how, like, you're playing with a group and suddenly somebody has spent $50 to $100 more, and suddenly they have a much stronger deck. And you have to figure out how you can tune your deck better to keep up, or you need to figure out what cards you need to buy in order to kind of match that. And this is one of those implications that's kind of really insidious. If you think you're a better player, but you're running into the fact that, hey, I played Commander for 5 hours on Friday night, and I didn't win a single game. You're generally saying, I'm better. There must be something wrong with my deck. And so we can kind of easily point at the fact that we think we should be winning more than we are as a key driver and part of the mentality behind making your decks stronger and stronger and stronger and more powerful than the other decks that are around you, because you expect to be winning at a 50% win rate, when in actuality that just can't happen if you're playing equally with your friends.
That's so interesting. The reason that I say that is because I think everyone has been there in their pods on a Friday or Saturday night where they see, hey, I brought out this new deck. I've been building it for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever, and I'm ready to kind of, spread its wings and really see what it can do. And you play for 5 hours and you didn't win a single game. And that is super disheartening. I'm sure everyone who's listening can have a story that's very similar to that, or if nothing else, felt something very similar to that. I know I've had situations where I thought, man, this deck is great. I'm going to go and I'm going to play. And then I lost a bunch of games in a row, got so discouraged that I thought, okay, my strategy is all wrong. So clearly this isn't a very good deck. And I've started to warp things, like you said, around, well, was it me? Was it the deck? I guess the deck isn't very good. And I've even going so far as to have taken apart decks because of this type of thing. I've actually said, this wasn't good. It didn't do well. I'm pulling it apart. And, what based upon what you're saying here is that we've got this misconception of how these play patterns are running and how our win rates are going, that deck might not have been that bad. I just might have been in the smack dab in the middle of the statistical losing streak of that deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can actually plot out what your expected win rate is for a 25% win rate and what your record would be. And I did a example run of, if you played 3 games a night, you played 3 games a week over an entire year. It's like 150 some odd games. And it showed that you're pretty much guaranteed over that year to have a month of not winning a single game of Commander at that rate. Which, that is really hard to take in. And it really, when I started looking at that and realizing that winning in Commander just doesn't make sense to focus on that, I really readjusted my mentality. So I had to step back and say, hey, sometimes you're just going to lose. And you have to accept that. So why not try to have fun while realizing you're just going to lose? And try to find your own little victories in each game while you play, rather than shooting for the win. I mean, you always want to aim for that. If you're playing CEDH, you want to aim for that, for sure. But I usually just try to make sure that my deck plays the way it does. And it really changes where I get enjoyment in a game. It actually did change how I play Commander as well. I have noticed that over time, my decks have gone into making games go longer and longer, so that I can have more time playing my game and enjoying what my deck is supposed to do, rather than just trying to finish up a game very quickly. I think I kind of describe it as I like to try to find my way out of a maze, rather than just like jumping to the finish line. And it really adjusted where I found enjoyment in Magic when I finally looked at all of this.
That's really cool. Especially since, a lot of times people frequently describe some of the best ways to enjoy CEDH in a more specific manner it's the journey, it's not the destination. Frequently we have situations where people say, I wish Thassa's Oracle or XYZ WinCon hasn't homogenized so much of the format. And we can get into the topic of nuances all day long, but a lot of people are looking at that with the end in mind and not necessarily the journey along the way. And what you're describing here is definitely more of an emphasis on journey and not as much emphasis on destination. Would you say that that's about right?
Oh, 100%. And exactly what you're saying, it is the journey along the way. Or if you look at it in literature, it's the hero's tale. You know they're going to win at the end, but what's really interesting is everything from A to B, not the fact that you got to B.
Yeah, I really like that analogy a lot, the hero's tale. That's really cool. I don't know anything about literature, so that's why it's such a cool concept to me, I guess. So that's really cool. And I also wanted to touch a little bit more about what you are proverbially saying is an arms race in a lot of commander pods and a lot of local metas. I think it's interesting how you kind of describe what is essentially an arms race. I'm not doing very well. It's obviously got to be a problem with the deck. And so I'm going to power up the deck. And then all of a sudden you start winning more games of Commander, but it's actually disproportionate. So I think that's a really interesting concept. Can you dig a little bit more into something like that?
Yeah, and it happens more often in new groups playing or new shops opening up, or at like a GP or something like that, where you have people that haven't played closely for a while. Generally, when you get people that have played together over months or years, they have an idea of what they're going to be playing against together, and they will have a understanding of what is generally expected. But when you have somebody coming in that's new, or you have a new group forming overall, people aren't really sure what they should be aiming for. So I have a really good picture on almost all of my casual decks about what I am trying to do and how I limit myself. Because in Commander, we have access to some of the most broken spells ever, and some of the best protections, some of the best mana ramp, and it's really hard to say, how do I make it so that I can play the way I want to without being oppressive to everybody else? I mean, so like, I will play really strong, really old cards. I love playing Eureka. It is the best spell to resolve ever, especially for people who've never played it. But at the same time, I limit myself. I only have like 3 or 4 counter spells in the deck, and they're not free. Or you find ways to make it so that you can stick at a level, and to kind of stop the arms race, you really have to, instead of looking how you're winning with the deck, look at what you're wanting to do with the deck, so that you can identify, is my deck doing what I want it to do, more than is my deck winning? Because you can really affect, is my deck doing what I want it to do, way more effectively than you can affect, am I winning in a regular game, without jumping ahead, without dumping a lot of money, or without jumping towards those really powerful or effective win conditions that are going to warp a newer group of players towards those.
I think it's a really great idea, mostly because it's very, very liberating. A very easy metric to define how good / bad you are in a game where there's, a winner and losers is, did you win or not? That's a really easy metric to define. But when you actually define your own metric of winning and or success, that isn't tied to that very binary, I won or I lost, especially in something like Commander, you really open yourself up to so much more, I want to say fulfillment, almost.
One of the examples I have is I have a Will and Rowan Kenrith Planeswalker deck. And one of my goals in every game is get a Will or a Rowan emblem. It takes generally 3 activations if you're not messing with it. But if I get one of those emblems, I won in that game. I don't care who actually won. I just feel like the deck did what I really wanted it to do. So I'm happy. I built a deck, it did what I wanted to do, and I had fun playing with people. That's it. I mean, that's a win for me. It's a victory. As compared to, I might actually win at the end, but I don't keep track of that anymore. I used to. A while ago, I had an 800 card deck box that basically had each deck sectioned out, and I had a win-loss record above it written onto the lid. And Yeah, I haven't done that in probably 2 or 3 years now. Well before COVID happened. I dropped that box a long time ago. But yeah, it's way more helpful and way more enjoyable.
That's really cool. So it's a really liberating idea. I think it's really great, but we got a snag. We have a little bit of a kind of a snag in the road here, and that has to do with tournaments. You have your liberating victory of creating your emblem, like you said, but that's not going to win you a tournament. And the EDH Commander CEDH tournaments are starting to pop up more and more. They were definitely bubbling before COVID hit, and now that the world is starting to open back up again, they're starting to come back. So,
Yeah.
What do pertaining to all this, tell us a little bit about what prize structures typically look like with this, how win rates might affect this. Talk to us a little bit about this in the frame of a tournament setting.
So for Commander, we usually see two types of tournaments. We see tournaments with a points structure where they have goals or achievements that the tournament organizer sets up, where if you do X or Y during the game, you get points. Or at the end of the game, you have players vote as far as who was the most fun to play with, or who had the best play, things like that. And you get points, and that all gets tallied up at the end of the day. And you get a total points based off of either what you did while playing or what other players thought about you. And then you have the straight Swiss tournaments, where you have everybody sitting in pools of 4. Then after the first game, the winners get paired together, the losers get paired together. And the big challenge with all of the traditional Swiss format Commander tournaments that I found. So I made a video about this 6-8 months ago, and I was doing a lot of research into historical Commander tournaments and what the prize structures look like. And they were structured very similar to 1v1 tournaments, where you have the top 8 or top 4 getting like 90% of the prize pool. Mm-hmm. And then you have pretty much like nothing being below top 8 or top 16. That's pretty much what all of them were. Now, these had 150 people in it, like the Commander Championship at GP Vegas in 2018. It was like $60 to enter, and I think they had over 120 people enter it.
Wow.
And it was the same thing, where prizes weren't paid out past... Sorry. You didn't make your entry fee back past top 16. And everybody that was below top 16 to like top 32 got what was equivalent of 3 packs out of it. But everybody else got either their entry fee or more after that. And if you think about that, you have something where from a Magic tournament player's perspective, you have expected value. You have the expected value of a pack of cards. You have the expected value of a tournament. If you say, I can get a 55% win rate going into a Magic tournament, you can calculate out the expected value of what you could win by where you will be at the end. And it's what a pro Magic player would look at for their tournament ranking, or what a store would look at for opening a box and selling singles. You can calculate this out. And the EV for that Commander Championship with a $60 entry fee was something like $12. Mm-hmm. Like the expected value of you going in was you were spending $60 to play 4 rounds of Commander, and you would get $12 back.
That's yeah, it doesn't take a mathematician to say that that's not great EV. So
yeah, so what you want to try to do from a tournament perspective, you want to try to find ones where either the prize structure isn't like massively emphasized on the top. It's not top heavy. It kind of spreads out through the whole thing. Or it isn't quite looking at you're not looking at an overall prize structure, or you're looking at a league. where you can actually track a win percentage over time rather than a single tournament. A Swiss record is very luck based. On top of your 25% win rate, CEDH has the other problem of turn order has a massive implication on your chances to win. There's a person, I believe it's Scromob, that's doing the CEDH metagame project, and he's been having people submit their records and trying to just get data over time of who wins the games, what turn they win on, how they won. And when I had done tracking, I usually got that player 1 was at like a 30% win rate. Player 2 and 3 were fairly close, and player 4 just had the brunt end. And over, I think, like almost a year of data, player 1 has close to a 35% win rate. Player 2 is like 25, player 3 is 20, and player 4 just eats it really bad. And it not only do you have the fact that you need to be lucky to win in a high variance format, you also need to, at every single table, roll lucky to get placed first so that you play first. And you just the odds of rolling dice so many times is never in your favor.
No, it's not. Yeah,
so
that's brutal, but also very accurate. The resources that you gain or have access to from a T1 perspective are just so disproportionate to the person in T4. It's significant, and you don't even have to look at the data to even know that just by playing your share of CDH games. You know the person in turn order that's 4th. It's just like, all right, I guess I'm along for the ride here. Maybe I'll get lucky in some other way, because I didn't get lucky with the dice.
Oh yeah.
I
started up with a few games testing for the Major League Commander tournament that's going on, and there was 1 week where I went 3rd or 4th 10 times, and of those 10 games, I got to play my opening hand twice.
Wow.
Meaning it was wheeled, time twisted, or winds have changed 8 times in that time frame. And it's just like, okay, so I have no agency going 3rd or 4th.
Wow.
I just couldn't. I made some mulliganing decisions and just toss them out of the water.
That's brutal. And then sometimes you're going to get super unlucky with that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal.
So based on all of that, what I kind of have like 2 ways of looking at what a good Commander tournament would be. And the first one is really not a tournament. It's go to a store, pay $20, play Commander, have them pair us up all night long and feed me pop and pizza and just have a good time. You're giving money to the store. You're not having to worry about finding pods because they'll match you up, and you're just there to play and have fun. Like, that's, if I could find a store that would do that would just like, hey, here's dinner for a Friday night, have fun, play Commander, we'll get pods going for you, I would go there pretty much every week. I would love it. But then if you're not doing that and you actually want to see who wins, you need to increase your sample size. Like, that's just it. You can't do an 8-round tournament. It doesn't work. And you're not looking at who is the winner after an 8-round tournament. You're looking at who has the highest win rate after 20 games, after 30 games. And then you'll actually see who is the winner or what strategy will be winning throughout that time frame. Those are kind of my ideas as far as what's a functioning Commander tournament, because otherwise, in all other situations, you're just looking at something that isn't worth it for players to actually play.
Given your experience, because you have been in tournaments before and you've definitely been extrapolating this data, is there any way that you can hedge your bets, if you will, or maybe reduce the gap, if you will, in certain circumstances where that's just not available? The soda and pizza Friday night actually sounds like a blast. I would absolutely go to that too. But there's also, people who want to put on a tournament that just aren't going to be able to have a 30-game tournament weekend. They're only going to be able to do one day, maybe two. What are some ways to help reduce some of this variance, or have you found any? Just talk to me a little bit about
that. You're not going to be able to reduce the variance. If everybody is bringing top-notch decks and everybody is playing their best, you have the options of... There are a few minor things you could do to help with variance. Even pod distributions predetermine who's going first. Predetermine every single player's order and make sure that they are playing at an equivalent turn order. So for the Major League Commander tournament, I actually went through and saw that over the course of 12, 16 games, one person on average was at their average turn order was 2.1 and another person's average turn order was 3.3. And that was just because when they set out the turn order, they just rolled D1000s and who's going first, who's going whatever. And the dice just massively disfavored 5 players and gave one person a massive advantage. And it took a bit of time, but I rearranged it so the closest you could get in that time frame was people at 2.4, 2.5, and 2.6. And so rather than having a really large spread of who's going first and who's going last, you basically move it down so it's a very close range of where your option is. So that takes a bit more time for the tournament organizer to prearrange that. And it's not always possible. Your other options are not doing it Swiss and just doing it straight off of Winrates. And that would be a more favorable to the players and more representative of their abilities. And then at the point where you have distinctive top 8 or top 4, you can then have them play a game or a few games to figure out who wins the actual tournament. But Swiss is not the way to do a Commander tournament in any way, shape, or form. If you're wanting it to be attractive to players to reasonably let them win. And then the last option is to flatten out the prizes. I mean, make it so that 60, 70% of the people get their entry fee back. It makes it so the people at the top don't get a lot. They get more pride than anything else. But that would make it so it's much more enjoyable for the people that are playing to not just say, hey, I'm throwing away money. It's very similar to a pre-release. Most of the pre-releases that I have gone to, there are some that do them as just massive 96-person Swiss tournaments. And then there's others that say, hey, this is a pre-release. This is more about fun and playing with new cards. We're just paying out based off of win records. So if you only won 1 out of the 4 rounds, here's a pack. If you won 2, here's 2 packs. If you won 3, here's 3 packs. If you won 4, well, here's a little bit more, but we're not massively top-heavy this prize pool.
Gotcha. So if I go quote-unquote 4-0, I'm not getting 16 packs. I might be getting 6 packs or something.
Yeah.
And the person who went 0-4, maybe they got a pack just for entering. That just just happens. That's just something that you get.
And that makes it so pretty much regardless of whether you're on the winning side of the coin or the losing side of the coin, you're not as penalized for things that are out of your control.
That's really interesting. I think it's interesting also what you said earlier about taking the dice roll out of the pod's hands in order to help better spread out the turn one, if you will, or the advantage that player one gets over maybe seat four. And while that would be more work for a tournament organizer, I think that would actually give a much better play experience to all of the entries into the tournament. Or is that what you would say is happening?
Yeah, so in this league, every single player has two home games where they are guaranteed to go first, and then they just randomized everybody else. And so I went through and I reorganized everybody based on their average turn order within the individual pods that they were in, and was able to get that done. So everybody had a guaranteed number of going first, and then everybody else had a very similar overall turn order. So on average, everybody was going second or third. You did have some fourths, you did have some firsts, you did have a few people that were like 1, 2, 2, 2, 4, 2, 1, 4, 4. But on average, you're more in the middle, and you have a much higher chance of being active in the game than just what a random dice can give you.
Would you say that there's a certain amount of extra stuff that you will do knowing that ahead of time? Will you mulligan differently? Will you make different decisions based upon that? Do you see anything having that any sort of effect in the game itself with this type of data?
I mean, if you're playing the same deck across the entire tournament, knowing what turn you're in, it's really just going to inform your mulligan decisions. At the point that you're making the mulligan decisions, you know what decks you're playing against. It depends on the tournament whether you know their deck lists or not, and that will tell you what you need to be aware of. And so overall, you can say, hey, this pod, I'm going against 2 Turbo Adnaz decks, and I'm in 4th. I'm probably just going to chalk that up to a loss. But if I can pull a draw out of this game, great. I mean, so you kind of have to... knowing that, you can get a better perspective on what you are going to see happen in the game, so you're not massively disappointed. And so I had a game where I was going forth on a control deck against 3 other proactive decks. And I was playing Simic, and 2 of the other decks were Kenriths. So it's just like, okay, there's 2 super proactive 5-color decks that are just 5-color good stuff plus Adnaz. Let's just go. Mm-hmm. And I'm going pretty far out there. Hey, before I even sat down to the game, I accepted that I would lose it. I just knew my odds were against me, and as the game went on, I got pretty dang close to a draw. We went to time, we went to turns, and based off of 2 other players' decisions, I ran out of resources and I couldn't stop somebody from winning. So, yeah, I mean, I almost got a draw out of a game that I expected to lose. That was good. I mean, it felt like I was doing really great in that game. But overall, I just knew I wasn't favored in any way.
So let's talk briefly, or let's even just spitball a little bit. You know, there are definitely times when I think this type of structure would really go a very long way to help with certain shortcomings in the current tournament structure for a free-for-all format like Commander. There's actually very little support for it currently. And I don't mean it like in a prize way. I mean from a logistical standpoint. I mean from a data standpoint. It's actually surprisingly lacking out there. And so what would you say to somebody, or what would you do to help shore up somebody whose prize support can't be distributed? It can't be spread out, if you will. Let's say the winner of this tournament gets an Underground Sea. Well, you know, you can't carve up an Underground Sea into 16 pieces and give it out. What would you say to help something like that in a tournament setting? Was there any advice or recommendations you would give in that type of structure?
in that type of a structure, I would say that it would be better for the tournament organizer to reassess their advertising for their tournament, because that is a very structural change. You are saying our first place prize is an underground seat. Now, in all reality, that's a great draw to get people to play, because that's a really high cost prize. However, that is incredibly top heavy for the prize structure. So if you are wanting to do that, if you are wanting to draw people into that, the best way to make it actually fair to the players is to make it a longer tournament and make it instead based and make it particularly not Swiss. Make it win rate based. And that would be the best way to make it so that it is fair to the players as far as having a really top-heavy price structure. That way you can say, compare it to like basketball or another major pro-level sport. Having a underground C at the top of a competitive EDH tournament is like telling a team you're going to make it to the championship. Like, it's that big of a difference. Is you're saying, hey, I'm just random team over here. You're telling me that I can possibly make it to the playoffs and I might actually win the championships for the year. Well, okay, there's a lot to get from A to B, and not a lot of that is actually under my control. And it makes it so it's really unfair for the players. If you make it a really long tournament, you make it a league, and everybody's playing games, they're playing a pot or two a week for a year, hey, that will get you a really solid picture of who really deserves that underground C. But then again, that's not really a league. I mean, that's not really a tournament. That's a league. And that's how you could get an underground C to be fair for the players to try to win.
There are definitely people that win tournaments.
Yeah.
You know, we actually have a CEDH tournament grinder scene, which I think is really cool. There are people out there that will enter into tournaments and they will grind tournaments. And we see certain ones that bubble to the top frequently. Now, so there's obviously, while there is this degree of variance that is available out there, there are things that these players are doing to reduce those gaps. What do you think, without, putting words in anybody's mouth or anything, would you say that they might be doing to help reduce some of these gaps?
Playing the best strategy regardless of how fun it is.
Okay. So they're sacrificing maybe play experience for, quality, or maybe that's the wrong word.
There's
play experience.
Yeah, they're sacrificing, they're trading off the enjoyability of Commander as a high variance, every game is different format for the best strategy, and pushing that to its limits with their ability to understand and pilot their deck. So,
okay.
I mean, it is a way that people can play. I mean, we have tournament grinders; they do that. However, I mean, we also have like Magic Arena, and we have 90% of best of one is just red or white aggro right now. I mean, it's not fun to play against, and generally, it's not super fun to play, but it's fast to play. You can get a ton of games in. But you lose that uniqueness that makes Commander when you're doing that. Now, props to them. They can win it. They're going through the current system and they're having to fight all those odds. Great. It's not my cup of tea. I'll say that. I mean, I much more prefer. I mean, heck, I'm the guy that made Tassigr Control. I made a deck that was an underdog from the start just because I believed in it. I thought that I knew how to pilot it. And I did really well with it, but it is not the best strategy. It never has been, and I don't think it ever will be the best strategy, but I love playing that deck. And I have taken that to GPs or whatever, and I've sat down in pods and just played it because I didn't care about getting anything out of it. I was just there to try to play it with other people that were trying to play competitive Magic. So, I definitely say that they are playing If they're playing the way they love to play, great. All the more to them. Let them have fun and continue to win in the tournaments as they are. But my view on it is that it's not as enjoyable in the long run to do that sort of a grind, because you're just playing the same thing over and over again. It's like playing Arkham decks, and you do it for a while, and then you know everything that the deck does in every single situation, and it's not fun to play anymore.
Loving the throwbacks to Arkham Daxon, by the way.
Yeah.
Loving the throwbacks.
I mean, it's a very linear deck. You just literally have to play your commander and tap him.
I love that deck though. When it was like like Paradox Engine.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it was fun. But you're right. The first, second, fifth time you played it was so much fun. The 30th time you played it, you're like, I know these decks inside and out. And depending on whether or not that's your cup of tea, you might get tired with that deck that always played exactly the same every time, and you might end up taking it apart as a result. So it's a very interesting point. All right, so one last thing. Let's take off all the reins. Star City Games or Channel Fireball, they came to Cameron. They came to you today, and they said, all right, you are our head tournament organizer. I want you to do two things. I want you to maximize the amount of fun that we're going to have. We only have a limited space because we're renting a massive hall because of our turnout. Budget only affords us to do 2 days, okay? You're in charge of the tournament. You've got... Oh, and we'll give away some reserve list cards as our prizes. And then they don't want to be involved, and they just kind of walk away without getting your input. What would you do here? How would you create a tournament? From the ground up. How would you
from the ground up?
From a ground up, how would you create a tournament?
If we have 2 days, I would say everybody makes day 2.
Interesting.
And it would just be random pairings of everybody constantly. You wouldn't be breaking winners and losers. You're just trying to see who has a good win rate and who doesn't. If you're genuinely going for competitive EDH, you're just looking at getting as many pods in as you possibly can and see who at the end of that has the best win rate and best tie breaks, if you need that. If you're going to day 2, that's probably that's going to be a 16 to a 20 round overall tournament. You'd be able to see in that time frame, you should be able to see a distinctive crew at the top, and you would be able to award prizes just based solely on win rates. I would entirely divorce it from any sort of Swiss tournament structure. Any of the current tournament structures just can't support a multiplayer free-for-all format. So you really can't use any of the existing Wizards programs or the reporting systems they have to say, hey, this person won in this one. You pretty much are playing this out by hand. You're pre-making the pods, you're pre-ordering everybody to try to get them as close to an even turn order on average, and just going for it. It kind of sucks if people start dropping, but you kind of would have to roll with that. I haven't put much thought into how to do that. It's an interesting question. And
I did put you on the spot, so we're not expecting a perfect rollout of a tournament here or anything. But, yeah,
I'm just thinking of how I could script this out in my head because programming solves most of these issues.
Yes, it does. Agreed, yeah.
I would probably look at trying to get everybody to play as many games as possible, go entirely off of win rate. Don't break up pods based off of winners and losers. Just do random seeding all the time. All right, try to not random seed. Try to have everybody play everybody. So that's what, round robin more so. That's really difficult to do with so many people, but you should be able to at least get everybody a chance to try to play as many people. If you genuinely play, if it's a 16-round event and you're playing 3 new people in every single pod, that's getting you up to math head failing. It's 54 different players. So you could get a decent sized group there. If you need to go more than that, you're not going to be able to play everybody, but you're going to be able to play a good sampling of the pod, and you'd be able to get a good overall picture of people's win rates and go off of that.
That's really cool. I think that's a really interesting way. So are you saying that you wouldn't do a top 16/top 4 kind of thing? You just go win rate and then, hey, here's our victor?
I would probably do win rate and here's our victor, or if we did do a top, I would do either top 8 or top 4. And even then, I would have them play multiple games.
Really? So this would not be a best of one, and the one person who got it got to go. You just happen to have the really crazy draw gets to win. So you would actually say it might be a best of 3, almost?
Best of 3 or best of 5 if we did top 4.
That's a lot of games. That's a lot of,
I mean,
you are a grinder. That is a grinder.
I mean, I'm trying to be fair.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be fair. I know it's one of those things that, in all reality, it's not fair to the players. And so if you want it to be fair to the players have to play more.
It's interesting. All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. A big thanks to Cameron for coming on. This information genuinely was valuable. It really opened my eyes to a perspective of Commander that I took for granted for so long, pulling over experiences from 1v1 formats. My influences on arms race, my influences on win rates. That's been invaluable information. So thank you very much again, Cameron, for coming on today. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you've got coming up.
Yeah, so I've got a YouTube channel. You can find it really easy, labmaniacs.com/YouTube. We have a Discord. It's open. There's some private stuff for Patreons, labmaniacs.com/Discord. And if you want to hit me up, you can talk to me on Twitter at labmancam or Cameron at labmaniacs.com. Shoot me an email. Right now for the YouTube channel, I've been working on some gameplay videos. They are long edits. Oh god, they're long edits. But I'm also working on deck rundowns. So I really enjoy being able to take a primer and boil down what you really need to know or 10 minutes. And it's been an enjoyable experience, both learning decks that I've never seen and then just kind of being like, oh, that's all this deck is doing? Hey, it's incredibly effective, but okay. Yeah, that's where I'm at and what I'm doing.
Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this episode of the podcast. So big shout out to our sponsors, TCG Player, Dragon Shield, and all of you over on Patreon. And tune in next time when we will talk about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will see you next time.